People very often ask me both how and why I started my podcasting journey. Well, as an engineer, I'm frankly very passionate about math. I wanted to find somewhere to share stories of great mathematicians from Archimedes to Alan Turing and everyone in between. And for that reason, I want to tell you a little bit about my preferred hosting platform, which is Zencaster. Now, before I continue, this is usually the conversation I have with anybody who is wanting to start their own podcast. I know there are so many people out there with passions that they want to share with the world or unique knowledge that they're just looking for a platform to start with. And Zencaster is a wonderful all-in-one platform. What I mean by that is you can do your recording and your editing and use AI to create a transcript and distribute to all platforms, including Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere else where podcasts are played. For anybody like me who might worry at first about what you might sound like on an audio recording, Zencaster's post-production process makes you sound really, really smooth. It automatically removes any of the ums or ahs in your recording. It removes any of the awkward pauses in conversations, and it also helps you to set the right podcast loudness and levels while reducing any background noise, all with the click of a button. It couldn't be easier. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code BREAKINGMATH, and you'll get 30% off your first month in any Zencaster paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experience I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. Fairly often, I get asked questions about how I got started podcasting with the Breaking Math podcast, and I'll often be asked this question by those who are thinking of starting their own podcast. That is, people who are looking to tell a story or share their unique wisdom with a larger audience or their passions, or maybe just advertise their business or services. I usually like to start this conversation by either showing off or telling about our preferred podcasting platform, Zencaster. Zencaster is essentially an all-in-one podcast hosting platform. On this platform, you can do everything from recording your episodes to editing your audio and video files to distributing your podcast to all podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever else podcasts are played. Now, there's more. When I first began podcasting, I used to get very nervous about how I would sound. I would sometimes stutter or have awkward pauses or other audio blemishes in my recordings. Now, Zencaster has a new suite of AI tools in their post-production process that make you sound really smooth. They automatically take out any of the ums or ahs in your recording. Also, they automatically take out any of the awkward pauses in your discussions. The tools will also help you set the right loudness and balance all the levels while reducing any background noise, all with the click of a button. Doesn't sound too bad, does it? You really should check it out. Really, the world needs to hear what you have to say. In fact, I'm going to give you a code below to help give you a large discount. It's all one word, Breaking Math. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code BREAKINGMATH, and you'll get 30% off of your first month in any Zencaster paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experience I do for all my podcasting content needs. It's time to share your...
Computation is a nascent science, and as such, looks towards the other sciences for inspiration, whether it be physics, as in simulated annealing, or as now is popular, biology, as in neural networks. Computer science has repeatedly shown that it could learn great things from other sciences. Genetic algorithms are one such method that is inspired, of course, by biological evolution. So what are genetic algorithms used for? What have they taught us about the natural process of evolution? And how can we use them to improve our world? All of this and more on this episode of Breaking Math. Episode 8, Evolution and Engineering. I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Gabriel.
And you're listening to Breaking Math. Breaking Math, of course, is brought to you by KUNM Generation Listen. And Gabriel, you wanted to talk about the Patreon?
Yes, we do have a Patreon set up with Breaking Math. We do intend to purchase more mics as well as some portable mics so we can do some in-person interviews.
And of course, our expenses are $17 a month. If you could donate $5 a month, you're paying for a huge percentage of that. And that'll be at patreon.com/breakingmathpodcast. And if you haven't checked it out yet, check out the Facebook at facebook.com/breakingmathpodcast. And of course, we're being recorded double today.
That's right. Today we have a special guest. We are featuring a guest from the University of New Mexico Communications and Marketing Department. Her name is Rachel Witt, and she will be recording us on video as we are being recorded on audio.
And you'll be able to check out that article, and we'll let you know when on the Facebook page, and it'll be at news.unm.edu. Why are we talking about evolutionary algorithms on a math podcast?
Well, I am happy to answer that. Just recently, yesterday in fact, I finally defended my master's degree project here at the University of New Mexico. I'm getting a master's degree in electrical engineering, and I just did my project on genetic algorithms.
And of course, genetic algorithms do have a lot of mathematical components, which we'll delineate in due time. And actually, that's the reason why you might have noticed a dearth of Facebook content lately.
That's correct. We've been very, very quiet on our Facebook because I've been working so hard on putting together my master's degree presentation, not to mention analyzing the data and spending a lot of time debugging. So we've been plenty busy recently.
Given the fact that this is your project, you could probably answer the question, what are genetic and evolutionary algorithms used for?
Yes. This is this question I feel very, very well versed in discussing. So evolutionary and genetic algorithms are actually used to design components, I'll say right now in engineering, but of course they have other applications as well, including art or data mining or things like that. My specific use for it was to design a genetic algorithm, which is slightly different than an evolutionary algorithm. My project was to design a genetic algorithm that would automate the design of a circuit, which could match an arbitrary waveform. That's for those of you who are not engineers. Essentially, every circuit has a waveform when a voltage is applied through it, and I wanted to be able to automate the process of a circuit design to match any given waveform that exists that you can choose.
And of course, these are called nonlinear problems, and these have been used traditionally for aerofoil design, wing design, neural networks, and a problem which we're going to introduce to you. It's called the 8 queens problem.
A lot of our listeners may be wondering, like how long have they been used for? These algorithms actually go back to the 1960s. They are nothing new, in fact. And of course, the principles of Darwinian evolution go back, to the days of Charles Darwin.
Yeah, which is like 1860s or something.
Yeah. And I wanted to mention specifically, you were talking about what kind of problems are these used for, and you said non-linear problems. So I think another way of wording it is if you can approximate a solution to a problem and have it be acceptable, then this sort of algorithm would work just fine. These algorithms would not work if you need a very, very precise, a very exact solution.
And by exact, we mean exact, because evolutionary algorithms can come up with extremely close solutions.
Indeed, absolutely. So it's a very exciting field, and it's a very exciting way of thinking about design.
And Gabriel, I think you had a message to people who might be getting their masters.
Absolutely. This is where I've been thinking about this for the last weeks. For our listeners, for anybody who's wanting to get a master's degree, or specifically anybody who needs a research project, I thought about how I'd phrase this, and I almost said, just steal my idea. And the reason why I say this is there are countless ways of doing what I did, and I only chose one of them. This field is so exciting. So might I encourage you, if you have any interest in computer science and you're in an engineering field at all, might I encourage you to consider solving a problem with a genetic algorithm. You can even do the same problem that I chose because you'll do it your own way. Pick a waveform and design a program to emulate that waveform.
Yes, and to give you a quick example of a nonlinear problem, we're going to talk about the 8 queens problem. Imagine you have a chessboard. You have 8 queens on the chessboard, and you need to put them in position such that no 2 queens can attack one another. How do you do that? It's difficult to do, except a genetic algorithm can actually do it very well. And we'll keep coming back to this example for every component of the genetic algorithm. We will split this episode into 4 main components that we have identified as the crux of working on any genetic algorithm project. These are as follow: DNA representation, fitness evaluation, parent selection, and offspring creation.
DNA is a method of representation found in natural creatures, and it is extremely complex and non-linear. It is also hierarchical. DNA can be divided into subcategories of chromosomes, and even further into genes and base pairs. There are 4 base pairs, A, C, G, and T. 3 base pairs represent one of 21 different amino acids. These acids go on to create proteins and enzymes which catalyze reactions that govern everything that goes on inside a cell. So, what can we learn from such a complex process?
Now, DNA obviously is really complicated, but its purpose is very simple. It represents who you are, what created you. It's the difference between a genotype and a phenotype is important. Gabriel, do you want to talk about that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So as Jonathan said, DNA represents who you are. If we use that term in talking about an algorithm, DNA is just information, that you would have in a parent that goes on to a child. Now, the terms phenotype and genotype for a few non-biologists. Genotype is all of the information in your genes. Phenotype is how that information is expressed in your physical body. So not all the information that is in your genes gets expressed in your physical body.
The example I like to use is the difference between a blueprint and a house. On a blueprint, you have, for example, like a ruler. There's no ruler in a house, but you have all the components of the house that go into it.
Very good, very good. Yes, I like that analogy a lot.
Now, I wanted to talk about the DNA and the 8 queens problem. Let's say that your DNA is just a list of numbers from 1 through 8. Let's say, for example, 475238661. What that would mean, in this case, is that in the first column, it's the 4th one down. Second column, 7th one down, and so on. Now, Gabriel, isn't it true that those can be pretty arbitrary?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. In terms of genetic algorithms, how you define DNA is a completely arbitrary distinction, as long as it's consistent throughout your program.
So what was one gene in your thing that you made?
So the way I designed my evolutionary algorithm, and again, it breeds circuits. One gene is simply one electrical component that has 2 nodes on either side. Actually, 2 or 3 nodes, because I also included things like MOSFETs. They weren't used very much. For the sake of this conversation, let's just say a single electric component with 2 nodes is one gene in my program.
And if you haven't seen an electrical component that isn't in a circuit board, what they look like is, imagine a wire with a lump in the middle.
Yep.
That's most of them.
Pretty much. And that's resistors, capacitors. Mine included resistor, capacitor, inductor, also voltage source or current and current source. So those are very, very common electrical components and circuits. I didn't have to go that route. I could have also defined one gene as one simple closed-loop circuit that has a very simple waveform. It's completely up to me how I do it.
Yeah, I remember that your code went through like 5 iterations.
That's right.
And almost all of them had different DNA representations.
Yes, maybe we can share. Maybe I can share some of my wisdom with all my iterations with the listeners as we talk about how to make a successful evolutionary algorithm. So I mentioned we were talking about what DNA is in my program, but again, it's completely arbitrary. Let's say that you're trying to breed just 2 matrices, 3x3s, and they each have numbers. I'm not sure what you'd be trying to breed, but let's say that's what you're doing. Your DNA could simply be a single number in one of the boxes. That's it.
Yeah, that would be a gene in the DNA. Let's say that you're designing a wing. The DNA could be the list of shapes, the shapes defined by pairs of numbers that go down the wing. Yeah. Let's say you're designing an algorithm that's trying to go to the houses in the shortest period of time, visit the most houses. It's called the traveling salesman problem. Your DNA then would be the sequence of houses, and so on.
Yeah, so it's fascinating, and again, I keep saying this. It's so arbitrary. What I really like to do is think of as many engineering problems as I can. Think, okay, so if I were to break this down, what would be useful for me to consider one bit of DNA? Would it also work in the traveling salesman problem to just say, a one step of distance could be DNA, depending on how you set it up?
It really depends on how you set it up, if it's Cartesian or graph-based, but yeah.
Nice.
And in the problem that you had, how many thousands of different combinations were there of different circuits?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Before I want to explain this number very quick. So in my program, I made one creature, and I made it so it had a minimum of between 4 nodes and 6 nodes. Again, that's going to make a lot of sense for electrical engineers. Basically, that's a fairly complex circuit. Mine was not a simple program. I had if you don't include the value ranges of the nodes, if you don't include the value ranges of the components, then there are 147,600 different possible creatures that mine could create just starting out, just in the first generation.
Yeah, and it blew up if you wanted to include the range of different values.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're thinking of designing a genetic algorithm, you don't have to make it as diverse as mine. That required a lot of computer power, and that made it more difficult. You can start small. In fact, I would even suggest get a grasp on how to do a genetic algorithm and make it simple first, and then expand.
Just remember that for every free bit of data, you could go back to our episode TMI, episode 3, to learn what a bit really does represent. You have twice as many possible things to search. Depending on your fitness function, which we'll talk about next, that could be a problem. Part 2. Fitness evaluation. Fitness in nature is a simple definition with a complex implementation. A creature is fitter if it passes on its genes more times. This works for everything from bacteria dividing to dogs chosen artificially to trees competing for sunlight in the forest. And before we go into fitness, I'd like to introduce for the second half of the episode, Jalila Arthur.
Hello, I am the Breaking Math studio engineer.
You may recognize her from episode, I think it was episode 2, where she did the game.
20 questions.
Episode 3, right? Episode 3, TMI?
Yeah.
TMI.
That's right. She's back. She's back by popular demand. We're glad to have her.
And so anyway, fitness in a genetic algorithm is something that's calculated rather than something that just happens. I guess you could say that the fitness function for nature is just existing.
Yeah. Actually, I was thinking about this because in nature, with evolution in nature, it's clearly whatever lives long enough to have children. I guess that's the fitness, but it's different. It's different for a genetic algorithm, of course.
In a genetic algorithm, it's a lot like how you might actually design a dog. Because a dog that's an example where we have our own fitness function. We breed dogs for their ability to smell or their ability to take back game without dissecting it.
Would an example of fitness in nature besides just existing be proliferation?
Yes, proliferation is definitely a huge component of fitness.
So that would be like greater fitness for natural species.
Yeah. So, for example, if somebody has more children, then they're going to pass on more of their DNA. So they were more fit. But fitness is decided almost retrospectively in nature. Whereas when you're designing a dog or doing a genetic algorithm, you rank these things and you basically make them breed.
Yeah. One more thing. So I think that we had made very, very clear earlier on when we were describing all these components that every single one of these are completely arbitrary. So everything that you want to breed, everything that you want to design with a genetic algorithm will have its own arbitrarily defined fitness. You could have something, tallness itself could be a fitness.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. You pick it. So in my case, I don't think I've addressed this yet. So for my master's degree, I created a genetic algorithm that designs circuit boards of all things. And in mine, I chose a reachable goal. I wanted to design a circuit board that would match a very specific waveform. Now, for those of you who are non-engineers, basically with every circuit, anything that has something like a capacitor or an inductor, if you run a voltage through it, you flip it on, you flip it off, it'll have a waveform. It'll have a pulse.
Think about one of those dimmer switches. If you make it go up and then down, then the waveform goes up and down over time. That's basically what we were doing when I was helping him with the algorithm.
Yeah.
This.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That changed, and it's clear in my editing software the waveform that was produced as a result.
Definitely.
Very good. Yeah. So, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, and in the 8 queens problem, like we've been talking about, the fitness would be how many the fitness score is different than what you do with the fitness. The fitness score in this case would be how many queens can attack each other. You want to minimize that. So in this case, you would minimize the fitness instead of maximize it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in mine, so with my problem, the fitness score, of course, was an equation that we came up with. And again, there's so many ways to do this. It's so arbitrary. We came up with an equation that compared the waveform of the evolved circuit. You just pick one, one of the evolved circuits. How closely is its waveform to the goal waveform? And there's ways of comparing two waveforms. It gets into a little more complex math,
And for those who are interested, it's the cosine distance.
But again, so a fitness function is just how fit, however you define it, your breeded species are. Are there other examples of fitness in other algorithms?
Sure. For example, when you're doing neural networks, you have a certain data that you want to train. Okay, you have training data. This is in a certain example of a neural network. You have your inputs and your outputs, and you want it to be able to choose the categories well. So you rank the fitness based on how well it chooses categories. If you're evolving something for a wing design, you would rate it on efficiency.
Nice. And then, without going too far into this, you can even have multiple criteria for fitness. I'm trying to imagine, I know that there was the evolved antenna design from NASA. I haven't read the specific fitness for that one, but for example, if you needed an antenna to be both within a certain volume, a certain size, and have a certain radiation pattern as well, you can design your algorithm so that that's your fitness as well.
And all of this is stuff that you have to design.
Parent selection.
Life is divided into two main categories: that which reproduces sexually and that which reproduces asexually. This is not to mention parthenogenesis, wherein a creature has the option of reproducing without a mate. In the natural world, these mates are chosen by a turbulent relationship with their environment. How do we emulate this task computationally?
And joining us now is Rachel Witt. And yes, we're going to have a new person on for every segment. At the end of the episode, how many people are we going to have on? Like
well,
12?
It's a combinatoric problem. So if each time you... Just kidding.
But Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi. My name is Rachel Witt. It's great to be on the podcast with you guys today. I'm a big fan of your work. I've checked it out via Facebook and also on the website. I work for the University Communication and Marketing Department here at UNM. And part of what we do is work on getting the stories of our students and staff and faculty members out to members of the community, connecting them with the research that's being done at the university and also with the students and their initiatives that they're bringing forward into the community, trying to make a good kind of bridge between the university and the community. So.
Awesome.
And Rachel also was the videographer who we mentioned at the top of the show. So now let's get into parent selection.
Cool.
We touched on this a little bit in the last segment, fitness evaluation, because the two are very closely intertwined.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's, again, the same theme, the same thing that I said in the last section. Parent selection is quite arbitrary. It's largely dependent on the designer, on the program designer, and how he or she wishes to do it.
And now, before we go into that too much, off air, Rachel brought up an important question. Would you like to ask that question again?
Absolutely, sure. For just a little bit of background for the listeners, I am not mathematically minded, although I can do math. I am a journalist by trade and a writer, and so looking at mathematical concepts like these, like you guys bring about, is always really interesting. And when Gabe emailed me about this particular topic, he mentioned that randomness can be used to create particular images, which you guys are talking about now. But when I think of randomness, I think of it as a biological function, randomness within genetics, and I'd never considered it as being a computational element as well. I didn't know that could be a thing.
The way that this is done is through a process called pseudo-random number generation. Half the time they do that, and half the time you actually get a natural process and measure it electrically somehow. But what that is like you have an algorithm that does a bunch of weird stuff to a number. One of them is called the Mersenne twister, not related to the game Twister.
Yeah. Now, and it's interesting. In computer science classes, they mention random numbers because it's extremely hard to write a program that creates a genuine random number. And if I'm not mistaken, what's typically done is a huge list is made, a ginormous list is made. It's just a list like a receipt at a grocery store, and one after the other, random numbers are included, and then those numbers are made, roll a dice. Is that accurate? Or
Well, that's one method.
okay,
A lot of them have to do with primality. Some of them have to do with it's all number theory stuff. And you get a very difficult to predict thing. It has a lot to do actually with cryptography, which we'll be covering in a future episode.
okay. So essentially, yes, it is difficult to have true randomness.
If not impossible with a deterministic machine like a computer.
That's
Yes.
how I think. I'm
Yes.
like, I don't get how you can have something genuinely. I'm on the same page with you, Rachel. How can you have something that's genuinely random when you yourselves have said it's difficult to design the program that can generate that?
Especially considering that you are the computer programmer, thus you are telling the computer what to think. So how does the computer then take that on by itself and generate a random number?
When I use this computer, I access the disk. That, after a while, turns out to be a very, very random thing because of the way in which I interact with it. Imagine the sum of all of your actions. It's influenced by randomness all the time. So that's called basically entropy, which we covered a little bit in episode 3. The entropy for a random number generator, for a true random number generator, like you would need to generate something for cryptography, sometimes you have to let your computer run for a couple of hours. So the more random you need something, the more time it takes. But essentially, it's how twisted you could get something.
And I think if I'm not mistaken, one way to approximate that, if I were to say all that in one sentence, the longer you run the program, the more closely to true randomness it does approach, or it does approach. That's some way of saying it.
A little bit, yeah. And you could use things like magnets, specially designed circuits to get almost true randomness, because after a while, quantum fluctuations do make themselves greater and greater.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So always, it's nice to have a longer running program. But you are absolutely right. That's a very valid question, and the explanation is not always easy to distill in a quick answer.
But are you saying that quantum computers can help?
Quantum computers might be able to help with easier sources of true randomness, yes.
Very interesting.
Actually, they do that automatically. All you would have to do is initialize something using an H gate as many times as you have qubits.
Right.
I gotta say,
Which I'm like, goes right over my
qubits.
head.
Jonathan,
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up qubits.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
kidding. I have no idea what those are.
No, it's, yeah. I'm also less familiar with the computer hardware myself. So anyways, I'll take your word for it. Like that. Yeah.
Still interesting.
Indeed.
So yeah, parent selection. What method of parent selection did you use in your algorithm?
Hey, very, very glad you asked. So in my algorithm, I specifically included a bias, a pretty strong bias toward very fit circuits. So I started off. I had my entire generation of just parents. That's my Adam and Eve generation. I created all of them. Again, there was some randomness, involved in them, but basically, I already identified the most fit parent out of all of them. Now, to help influence the offspring in the next generations, I specifically wrote my program so that 1/3 of the time, the fittest parent out of the entire population was always chosen. I did that because I needed to finish my project in 2 months, and I needed results. So I was like, let's just help you along a little here, So
Speeding up
yeah.
the evolutionary process.
Yeah,
if you will.
exactly. Now here's what's sacrificed. When I do that, I have much less diversity, but I have results that show up sooner.
And to talk about why your diversity is important, imagine trying to find the tallest peak on a mountain. The simplest and most naive way to do that would just be to walk upwards. What's the problem with that approach?
Just walking upwards. Oh yes, on a mountain. That's gonna take you a long, long time.
Well, not only that,
What
but
if
you
you're
might,
wrong?
Yeah, exactly. You might climb up a hill and in the foothills and be at the top of a foothill, and you're not going to be at the top of a mountain.
That's right. Only when you're so the information to you is only available when you're at the top of that structure. So that's the tallest building that you're aware of.
Yeah, and so
And then you see the next tallest building. You have to go to that one.
Or building, sorry, mountain, right?
yeah, so you could think of a computer or an evolutionary algorithm as a blind person climbing a mountain, where they can't see the peaks. You don't know the peaks and the problem. That's one of the things that they're useful for, because you might imagine all these mountain climbers, and they're evolving to try to find the tallest mountain peak.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. I'd love to redo my program, and I'd love to have 6 solid months to run it, and I don't want to include a bias. In that case, I want to be truly random and see what kind of different results I get after 6 months. But considering that, I have deadlines...
It would also be interesting with more diversity in the parent class.
Yeah.
10,000 or something.
I think you're right. By the way, that's something else as well we wanted to mention. So, and I think we're going to get to this later in this process. But I made sure that my first generation was pretty large. I didn't want it so large that my computer slowed down, but I don't want it so small that I have a really limited gene pool. So I had 1,000, kind of arbitrarily chosen, but a little trial and error. I ended up with 1,000 different possible parents, and then I would choose at random any 3, but I'd make sure that, as I said earlier, a third of the time it was always the champion circuit.
And another way to do this would be to just do one generation at a time. Breed the parents randomly, but have the fitter parents, fit as they are, that much more likely to breed. And then have a new generation totally of children and just keep doing that over and over again.
Fun question. As we design these programs, we realize how many different ways you can do it. So, even among our listeners and even us later in the day, I'm sure we're going to think of so many other ways of picking parents. Do you have a short deadline? Do you have a long deadline? How many different ways aside from just randomly picking parents can you do it?
Size, shape, and color, maybe?
Oh, depending on I don't have color or I do have size. But you're right. You can sort them by any arbitrary characteristic and choose by any arbitrary characteristic.
Which is definitely related to how parents are selected, which has to do with fitness evaluation, which you weren't here for.
America. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. At Grand Canyon University, we believe in equal opportunity, and the American dream starts with purpose. To serve others in ways that promote human flourishing and create a ripple effect of transformation for generations to come. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.
Summer concerts, pool parties, chill nights under the stars. We're stocking up our closet so you're ready to look your best for all of it. At Plato's Closet in West Ashley and North Charleston, we're buying all things summer. So bring in your tees, tote bags, sandals, sunglasses, and more. We pay cash on the spot for gently loved name brand looks. Plato's Closet is the go-to destination for trend-forward teens and young adults who support local and shop sustainable. Visit Plato's Closet today. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just trying to understand. So your end product, it approximates a waveform.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And so I'm just curious, if you were to take away the bias and, in a perfect world, have the 6 months without the deadline to run those generations, do you think that the approximation would become closer to noon?
Oh, brilliant question. So, here's how I'm going to answer this. When you said noon, again, previously, if anyone just turned on our podcast now, who turns on a podcast halfway through? I don't know.
I do. That's what I do.
Okay. So, in case anybody...
For those of you just joining us.
Okay, yeah, for those of you just joining us, I actually have this really cool clock. And again, this is kind of arbitrary because I used a cosine function. I needed a 90-degree angle to stand for the worst fitness, and I needed a 0-degree angle to be the fit. But in short, if somebody who doesn't know trigonometry, that's the same as 3 o'clock for the worst. And noon, 12 o'clock for the best fitness. I literally had a clock print out on each of my circuits, and you could see right away how fit that circuit was just by looking at the clock.
And you were trying to get as close to noon as you could.
Yes, exactly. This is like a back.
Aren't we all?
It's a back
lunchtime.
Yeah, Ba-doom. Awesome. But no, that's exactly right. To answer your question earlier, so let's say that I had the full 6 months. I think that I would have had a huge diversity, like much bigger diversity in routes that got us there. You know what I mean? And I think that we would have had some circuits that got us there, but were really complicated. Some circuits that just had a nice arrangement and were simple and got us there. So the long and short is I would have had more diversity. You know?
Okay.
So that's the really cool part.
And when you're dealing with creatures, there's so much you can do. Just take inspiration from nature. If you decide to do this as a project, you could do things like create new Adam and Eve things just halfway through that just shake up the population a little bit. You can do things like have what's called a heat function that gets colder over time, and the colder it is, the less randomness there is. You could throw in meteors or a Grim Reaper.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Again, this is so much fun, and this is why I actually am. So I'm done with the project. This is the first time in my life that I'm continuing to tweak my code long after I've turned it in, because it's so awesome. I'd love to publish. I haven't published yet because it's not that I'm too shy, but I'd rather publish after 6 months. And I want more results. But I wanted to say this: a lot of our listeners might be wondering right now. We choose 2 parents. Is there any reason why in a program you can't choose 3 parents, 4 parents, 5 parents? And actually, I want to toss this off to you, Jonathan.
There is. When you select when you select just one parent, you get very quick evolution, but you don't get traits that might help each other combining. So you think about it like a tree, and each leaf is a different solution. Those leaves don't really run into each other very often. When you have 2 parents, you get basically the best of both worlds. But think about dating. Think about how difficult it would be if 3 people had to mate. That would take so much more energy, and the exact same thing happens with evolutionary algorithms. You do not get an increase in diversity, you just get an increase in difficulty.
Oh, wow. There's no increase in diversity when you have more than 2 parents.
Nope.
Wow.
That was what I was gonna ask. Actually, was like, does this mean that you could, in the terms of your project, move towards designer waveforms?
Oh,
with multiple different pools in there.
I see. Yeah, and it's funny, I guess. Yeah,
but I guess not. It doesn't.
Mathematically speaking, it doesn't improve.
Yeah,
that's crazy. So that will save our listeners who want to try their own program. We'd say again, I don't have the math in front of me right now, but it'd be cool to actually show them. We can prove it. We can say it's not going to help you if you have much more than 2 parents.
Offspring creation. So now we're going to talk about offspring creation. This is basically how you take 2 strands of artificial DNA and make 1 strand of artificial DNA.
Yeah. And this is very, very interesting, because what's the common theme that I've been saying all along about each section? It's completely arbitrary.
Random.
No, it's okay. There is randomness. I was gonna say I was gonna use the term arbitrary. Specifically, it's how the designer designed
That's
it.
what I've gotten.
Yeah.
The theme is design.
Yeah,
that's what
you have
I was
a design
gonna say
choice.
that after random.
Exactly.
That was my second choice.
Oh yeah, nice. So when we talk about DNA, so DNA is information. DNA is how is one unit of information, and I guess I think it'd be a good time to even talk about my project, obviously.
Well, how did you combine your DNA?
Okay, so before I combined it, I decided what one gene was, and again, my arbitrary assignment, I decided that one gene is a single electric component as well as 2 nodes on either end.
And for those who would like to know what a node is, just imagine you have all these different wires, the place where they connect together, the wires.
Yep, a connection for wires. That's actually really, really good, in fact, yeah. So one gene would be a resistor of any value at all, and little 2 wires on either end. Like that's one gene. And each circuit is designed by how many genes they have, the value of the genes. Like my values, I included a wide range. I had anything from 1 ohm for a resistor to, want to guess how big?
7
ohms. No, I had between 1 ohm and 50.
That's a great guess, I thought.
Oh, it's all good. It's okay.
50.
No, okay. 1 ohm and 50 million ohms.
Oh.
Whoa. Nice.
Yes.
50.
Now,
Wow.
yeah, no, it's fine. So basically, I have a huge amount of diversity. Now, I need to say one more thing. One version of my software included randomly chosen resistors from that whole range. I had absurd circuits very, very soon. It wasn't a very good. It wasn't very viable.
Yeah, they're like low power weird low power circuits combined with like trash can sized capacitors.
Yes, exactly. So I fixed it. I wanted to keep I fixed it. Now, I'm not a real math person, so I consulted with a math guru.
Debatable.
Fair enough. Well, no. So I talked about my problem with a wise guy, with a very smart, very smart dude who helped me design a specific formula. So it really throttled it. So I'll go and say it was Jonathan, the awesome dude right here. Jonathan, will you tell him how we specified it so it narrowed the range a bit?
Sure. What it did was it clamped down the range. So, for example, let me just give you an example of what this would look like colloquially. Let's say you have a die. It's a die with 6 sides, but 4 of them have 1s on them. One of them has a 2 on them, and the other has a 6 on it. That's kind of what it's like.
Yeah. Now, just to add to what you said, it is still possible to get any resistor value at all in the whole range, but there's a huge probability clamp to where the most common value that I chose was 470. I figured that's a nice low power, simple circuit value, and that was fine. So I would say it's not a true probabilistic. It's not a Gaussian random distribution at all, but I would say, very, very common values were between 470 ohms and give or take 1,000. Well, we didn't have negative ohms, really. So.
Oh, no, I don't think you can have negative ohms.
Yeah. So give or take. So, there's a small distribution around 470, but rarely did you get a million. But it's possible. It's possible.
So I'm just, again, trying to understand.
Yes.
You talked about how... So, Jonathan, you came up with this equation, and it kind of puts a law or a rule or some sort of limit
That's right.
around this, the DNA.
The way that new components are chosen in mutations, actually.
Oh,
yes.
So
yes.
not the DNA itself.
Correct.
There's like a bunch of diversity there, but it's a rule on the
value of it.
On the value of the DNA,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think that's interesting. I, of course, understand why we would want to avoid getting a low-power, huge capacitor computer or to generate that as a result. I get why that's not a good idea. But what I'm trying to understand is where that law, that limit comes into play with diversity and where, if you're going to put a law, I mean, we're talking about... Mm-hmm. Evolution, there's no laws
That's
there.
correct. That's correct.
Think about it this way. There are laws in evolution. For example, I can't like if I sprouted wings right now, I couldn't fly.
Right.
Things like that.
Yeah.
This is a way of simulating that kind of thing. And yeah, you can make it random, but you can even make it more random. For example, the DNA that Gabriel chose, it had a component and the nodes that it's connected to. And as I recall, the nodes were numbered in such a way so that the topology of the graph that represents a circuit would be similar between 2 similar DNA strands.
Yeah, I want to go and break that down into layman's term. I was really proud of this little part here because this was a breakthrough. This was cool. So as I said earlier, I decided to arbitrarily decide that one gene is just an electrical component and the 2 ends on each side. What I'm really happy with is I added what's called a history marker per se, where the first time a resistor shows up on the 2 sides, you've got a number 1 and a number 2. So there's this really cool list that's just stored in my program where it's history marker number 1. This is still a rough approximation of it. I'm not going to go into every detail, but let's just say it's called history marker 1. The first time that you see the node number 1 and a resistor of any value, and number 2, that's considered one gene. So that can evolve very, very often. And if I get 2 parents, and if I want to say, so I want these parents to be somewhat related, then you look at their history markers. How many of their genes are shared in the same spot in the same component? Does that make sense?
Yep.
And this is related to real evolution too, because you can't mate a human with a horse. There's pre and post zygotic barriers to this.
Yeah, exactly. So literally,
seems kind of obvious now.
Yeah, yeah.
But that makes perfect sense.
Now, what's unique about my algorithm is I didn't look at any tutorial online. It was through a lot of trial and error. I'm like, how can I better pick parents so I don't have so many failures that just don't breed anything? If I grab 2 random parents, I wanted some means of seeing if they're going to successfully breed. It turns out that you do have to have some degree of relatability. Now, I didn't discover this aspect. It was actually Jonathan who discovered the degree of relatability and how all that works out.
Yeah, I tried a bunch of values. If they're more than 40% related, basically you get inbreeding, which is as bad in digital circuits as it is in real life. Mm-hmm. And if you do less than 30% by a significant amount, you get like humans trying to mate with horses.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. You're basically, in short, your offspring will not be viable if they're not related. So there's got to be some degree of similarity. They've got to be in the same. We'll use the word species.
So
well,
you
how
have
did centaurs come about?
Oh,
See, I was going to bring that up next. So, like, for example, like a centaur, you could think of like, okay, yeah, but like, what would be a half human, half banana?
oh.
A humana?
honestly, don't be so close-minded. Just kidding.
This episode not brought to you by Humana.
Love is love, Jonathan.
Love is love.
And
Okay.
of course, in real DNA, the amount of DNA that two things can share is a lot more than in Gabriel's program.
Yeah.
For example, like humans share like 99% of their DNA.
And so let's talk about your program
Yes.
just once more. So when you're talking about trying to get them to create something that's viable and that sometimes it doesn't work, and it's like getting animals and humans to mating, what does that look like as a product for your program?
Oh, good question. Good question. So obviously you're going to have something. You will have something that exists. But
Right.
what might happen is you're going to have a circuit that just has obscenely unrealistic things. Like you're going to have, I'll give you a value of 12 voltage, and then you're going to have, a 50 mega ohm huge resistor, and you're not going to have any voltage go through at all. It
Right.
just doesn't work.
So we were talking about that before with
Yeah.
like the
trash can
the
size.
low power and the trash can
Exactly.
size. Great.
So it's like it
and
can happen, but it's inefficient way.
not just inefficient. Sometimes it
Yeah.
won't
Doesn't
even be
even
like
make
a real
sense.
circuit, or it's and sometimes you just get an abomination.
Yes.
One last component that we want to talk about, and this is related to offspring creation, so you kept in the same section, is DNA mutation.
We can say, so, as we're talking about how I assigned DNA, I said that one gene would just be a component and then the two nodes. But again, a gene is just one unit of information as far as our algorithm is concerned. So there are many other things that we talked about. I even talked with Jonathan about other ideas. Jonathan, what were some of your other ideas for how we would define one gene?
Oh, you could define it as loops. You could define them as trees. Trees, just when you have the DNA itself. Imagine if DNA, instead of being a long chain of stuff, were shaped like a tree. You could do that.
Interesting.
There's so many ways to do any kind of problem. And with the 8 queens problem that we keep mentioning, the way that you combine DNA is actually pretty interesting. So let's say they have 2 pieces of DNA, and one is just 1, 4, 3, 2, 5, 7, 6, 8. And the second one is 2, 4, 3, 5, 6, 8, 1, 7. You don't have to write those down. So when you combine the DNA, what you would do is you would line them up, cut both of them at the same spot, and just glue them together. Of course, you might have some numbers that are the same on both sides, and what you do with those is you just skip them, and you just get the next number up. That way you have a new range of values from 1 through 8.
When you say that it doesn't necessarily have to be a strand, it can be like a tree. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that?
Sure. So, all right. So let's say you have a problem where you're designing artificial creatures. You could define an artificial creature as where the DNA is a tree, where you have the trunk of the tree being the main body, the limbs being the limbs of the tree, and the fingers being limbs of those limbs. Something like that. There's a more abstract way called genetic programming that you could do with actual functions. So you write down a math equation at a tree where the junctions are the pluses and minuses, and the leaves are all the numbers. And so to combine DNA in that case, what you would do is you would graft on a limb with all its branches to the other one.
Okay.
Yeah, and just real quick, so one other thing as well, we said like one gene could be a single circuit itself, like a single closed-loop circuit that has a basic waveform. You know what I mean? That it could be even one gene, and then, of course, you can have a variety of different complex genes, depending on your skills with computer science and depending on how complicated you want to make it. You can have a whole variety of genes and a whole strategy for gene exchange. Oh, and that's the next part. We talk about how genes from the two parents. How do you design your program to get information in genes from the two parents to go to your child?
Oh, yeah. And how did it work in your program?
So in this program, I had a couple. My initial design was I had two parents, and I had a row of information from either one, and I just kind of randomly selected from either one. And and that's one way to do it. That's fine. As I wanted it to be a little more like human genes to a degree. There are genes that belong to one parent or the other, and there are genes that are shared, especially with when we have that 30% rule. So there's I put a strong bias toward the fitter parent. I said, so I've got these two parents here. This parent, parent A and parent B. Parent A is the fit parent. Parent B is the less fit parent. I intentionally selected it so that all of the genes that only belong to the fittest parent get passed on right on all the time. Then there's genes that belong to both parents. All of the genes that are active, and I'm sorry, we didn't talk about active genes and deactive genes.
All that is you could have a gene that's turned off. So I think in humans, you can have in humans, we get scurvy if we don't eat vitamin C. Even though we have the gene for making vitamin C, it's turned off so that we can see red.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, what I did is all of the genes that are shared among both parents, if they're active, they get passed right on, and if they're not active, they also get passed on. And there's a 50-50 chance whether the gene will be. I'm sorry, it gets complicated. If it's active in one parent and not active in the other, then it's just a coin toss. It may or may not be active in the child. Here's where it gets interesting. If genes are deactivated in both parents, I do a coin toss, and depending on the probability, half the time the gene is just deleted. The other half of the time it is passed on, but it's passed on inactive. And that's to start weeding things out. I wanted to weed out genes that got deactivated. It adds an element of change. But then lastly, there are genes that only belonged to the less fit parent. I really wanted to throttle those genes. So 75% of the time, they don't get passed on at all in any active form. Only 25% of the time, as you would have surmised, they do. And I have a few other nuances, but the idea is I put a strong bias toward the fitter parent. One other thing I want to say, the values. So you've gotten, not only the genes, but say you've got a resistor. Well, what's the value going to be? Is the value going to be, the value of parent A or parent B? What I did is two things. I averaged the values, so if you had, 1 and 3, the average would be 2. But then on top of that, I added a probabilistic distribution so that most of the time it's a perfect average, but there's a standard deviation, and very often the value will shift anywhere. So the lowest that the value can be is the value of the resistor in the weaker parent, or in the parent with the weaker resistor. The strongest it can be is the value of the stronger parent, and it's just a probabilistic distribution that's weighted about the average. So that was an arbitrary choice on my end. You can do it however you want.
And what all this drives home is you obviously didn't have enough time in 3 months to go through every single possible probability. No. I mean, just the amount of probabilities, even if you had only 4 numbers between 0 and 100%, you would have probably thousands of choices. So programming especially genetic programming, can help you get a solution when you're lost. I mean, designing a circuit to make a waveform is difficult. You have to do that's why they hire engineers to do it.
Yes.
That's why this program is so unique and this problem is so difficult.
It's fascinating. I think we've even said on previously in this recording, we even said I would love to see a whole bunch of students take on the same problem, because no two students are going to do it the same way. There's so much knowledge to be gained here, And I know that for me personally, the main takeaway for me is before I throttled the value of each component, thanks to the equation that Jonathan helped me put together. Before I did that, I had so many possible circuits that it wasn't realistic. So I guess that's the advice I'd pass on. I identify where you have, what's the term I'll use? Runaway probabilities. Identify where you've got so many possibilities that it's not a practical algorithm for your fitness function.
I'd say design when you can. You get to play God sometimes.
Design when you can, right? So, given your time constraints, obviously, there are certain things to consider.
I'm just beginning to understand, and I think that this is really great. So you were talking about how you can make that value of the genes change depending on what you want to do. Mm-hmm. You can design. There's all these ways that you can use your agency in this. And so you have a normal distribution. You're averaging between the two parents
Exactly.
to get the value of the offspring.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is that other researchers can apply the same thing, and then instead of averaging them together, they could add them
Yes,
together.
totally.
And then
Totally.
just like change the whole game.
Yo, you know what? See, isn't that why it's exciting?
I mean, the fact that I can understand like what the result would be
Yeah.
from that kind of change, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, genetic algorithms.
Yeah.
Couldn't even remember that
you're-
the other day.
You're totally onto it. You could just decide to add, and obviously that would result in a resistor that's twice as strong. But again, hey, it's your chance to play God in this, form of life. So what you say is a great transition to our next topic on mutations, because mutations are part of every single genetic algorithm, and
Yeah, I'm excited about this.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously in biological evolution, a mutation is something it's kind of like something occurs that's not supposed to happen. What's a good example of a mutation?
A mutation, for example, happened, I think, somewhere around 50 to 20,000 years ago. I don't remember the exact amount of time, where humans, where a T changed to, don't quote me on this, but it changed to a G. And because of that, sickle cell exists.
Interesting. It's funny because sickle cell, it has huge advantages for malaria. But it's not advantageous for
Anything else.
Yeah, for
Anything
everything.
else?
Yeah. So that's crazy. Also, I know that blue eyes are a mutation, and that's a deleterious mutation where people with blue eyes don't have information that people with brown eyes had.
Yeah, for example, and not only that, there might be a reason for the blue eyes mutation. And also, just like there is in sickle cell, for example, if you're ever a blue-eyed person and somebody brown-eyed is driving a car in the rain, they're going to drive you nuts because they don't put on the windshield wipers frequently enough. Because the focal distance for how much you could focus on a sheet of rain versus the road is different for people with brown eyes and people with blue eyes.
Wow, that's fascinating. So it's always a trade-off. So mutations, now real quickly. So on my algorithm specifically, I throttled the mutations big time. I wanted to guarantee them. So okay, I'll just tell you, straight up. Every single circuit that is bred in mine, every single one of them will have one of 5 mutations, guaranteed.
And to show you how rarely mutations are really beneficial, and why obviously your program use a lot of guaranteed fitter parents surviving over time.
Yes.
There used to be a thing called atomic gardens in the 50s and 60s where they had a big gamma ray source in the middle, and the plants nearest the gamma ray source would die. The ones really far away would survive, but the ones in the middle, sometimes they would do things like create the most popular grapefruit in Texas.
That's amazing.
Wow.
I had all 3 of us went, whoa.
Three minds
oh my
blown.
gosh. Wow, dude. Atomic garden. And so what became of the atomic gardens?
And the grapefruits.
We refined it and created
genetically modified.
Yeah,
fruits.
we improved the process and created genetically modified crops.
So why did we stop doing atomic gardens? Was it unhealthy?
Well, it's kind of like, it's not unhealthy actually. It was done for a while. They used to send out seed packets full of genetically modified seeds, and then people would do experiments and send back the results. But it stopped because people got better at genetic engineering, basically.
They didn't need the gamma ray to create those changes.
Yeah, instead of throwing a hammer at something like a monkey, you could, hammer it with like a much smarter monkey.
Sorry.
That was really cute.
Yeah. You could gently prod the monkey and get the same result, right?
Yes.
Okay, okay, awesome. I was not aware of atomic gardens. That is they need to incorporate that in the Fallout franchise. I play Fallout. It's a video game with atomic, mutations and all kinds of stuff. That's awesome. Wow. So the mutations that I included. The most basic mutation is a value change. It's the most minor nudge at all. It's a very, very probabilistic thing. The most likely scenario is that the value will change by 10% of 1 unit. So if there's something called a picofarad, and that is 10 to the negative 12th. So if you've got a capacitor, and if it's identified as being measured in picofarads, then the most likely probable mutation will be 1/10 of a picofarad, greater or less than. So that's a very minor nudge, and that's fine. You can have minor mutations. There's nothing wrong with that. Another thing that I do that's actually very similar to nature is a given component, one bit of DNA can suddenly duplicate and the other gene can suddenly transform. It's kind of a two-part mutation, really. It'll clone an element, and the other element will be passed through a random generator, and it'll have any other of the possible genes pop up. So you can have just a resistor, and suddenly at the end of this, you have the resistor and a capacitor next to it. You know what I mean? And it only happens in series.
And a mutation that you would see in the 8 queens problem is you just take 2 of the queens on the board and swap their horizontal positions. That's one mutation.
Yeah. Again, so a mutation, this is completely up to the designer. What do you want to do that will guarantee an unpredictable change in your children? And how frequently do you want to do it? You want to guess how many children out of 100 made it on average?
3.
Close.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
That small?
It was actually 11.
Wow.
Yes.
Dude.
Yeah.
So like 11%.
Yeah.
Which is actually very common in nature to have numbers that low.
Yes.
Yeah.
For example, sea turtles, it's something like 1 out of 5,000
Right.
make it. And so to summarize, for the 4 key components of the genetic algorithm are DNA representation, that's how you represent your problem, fitness evaluation, where you see how fit creatures are, parent selection, where you breed your creatures, and offspring creation, where the creature is birthed. We've explored the world of artificial genetics, the problems it can be applied to, and the omnipresence of areas in which it can be used for. Anyone at any time can improve the state of the art of artificial genetics and genetic algorithms by simply doing a project. It's an intellectual gold rush. So if you decide to write your own, be safe in the knowledge that you're adding to what it means to know how things evolve. I'm Jonathan Baca.
And I'm Gabriel Hesch.
And this has been Breaking Math. Breaking Math is brought to you in collaboration by KUNM Generation Listen. Leela, want to say anything about Generation Listen?
Yes, hello. My name is Jalila Arthur. I'm the president of KUNM Generation Listen, and we are here for UNM students to use KUNM as the resource that it is to you, and we invite you to get involved.
And today we had Rachel from the newsroom. Rachel, do you want to plug anything?
Once again, my name is Rachel Witt. I'm a communication representative with the University of New Mexico Communication and Marketing Department. We cover all kinds of news stories across campus, including interesting student, faculty, and staff research, awards, achievements. So check out our website, news.unm.edu, to see all the most relevant news going on at UNM today. Also follow my adorable pug dachshund on @Dobby_pup, DOBBY_pup.
Your dog has an Instagram?
And he is insta-fabulous.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to him now. Is it okay if we share him? Is it okay if we call him Math Dog? We've been looking for
Math,
him.
that's perfect.
Math dog.
I
need
was
a math
hoping no one
dog.
would notice that I plugged my dog's Instagram account there.